Thanks a lot, everybody, for making the time. So we're gonna pick up from where we left off last time. So last time we had focused on installing OpenIAM. We used the RPM distribution for it. So in this session, we're gonna really shift gears towards the most common use cases, right? Which is to kind of implement the joiner mover leavers process, right? People being onboarded, moving in a corporation, and leaving. So the first step in that is we need to be able to really onboard applications, and that means to get OpenIAM connected with with the target applications. The goal in that is that we want to be able to create a foundation to implement those processes, right? So we need to know uh, what identity information there exists in other applications that the IAM system is going to be interacting with and what level of access people have. It helps us with, being able to control how we, manage new accounts, but also it helps us to, do access certification, just to be able to have visibility into the level of access people have, um, building out the service catalog. There's a whole bunch of things that this foundation allows us to do. Okay. So the flow we're going to follow is we're going to do a little bit of an overview in terms of how these pieces fit together. We'll then jump right into installing the Active Directory connector, and then we'll go ahead and um, get that connector configured and pull data in, to build this out. Okay. Okay. So as I mentioned, right, this is the first step, right, in the whole user lifecycle management. Um, the foundation that is created. So like one of the things that we're going to do in this process is once the connector is hooked up, we're going to import all the group membership, all the groups which exist in AD, and then we're going to import all the users and the group memberships that they have. So when we import those groups, it allows us to do two things. When it basically builds out a record in OpenIAM of all the groups which exist, and then we can use them to define our birthright access rules. We can use it to build a service catalog, right? So it's really kind of an important first step. And also when we want to be able to see what groups a user belongs to, we want to be able to kind of have those references in OpenApp so we can build them out, right? And as we go through this, if you have questions, by all means, just post them and I will answer them as best as I can. Okay. So, a couple of things in terms of the terminology. Um, we use okay, sorry, there's a question here. The question was, did anyone else get an error message when trying to perform the RPM install? Said tried sudo, said you don't have permission to access this resource. Um, I would say if you're having problems with it, we did put this up on the community after the last session. It'd be great if you can share your questions there, and somebody from our team or other partners that we have will be happy to help out and kind of help you work through this. Okay. Okay. So a couple of things. So we use words in OpenIAM like connectors and managed systems. Connectors is pretty common in the IAM industry, right? It's really referring to the piece of software that allows us to talk to a type of target system, right? So a target system is Active Directory. It could be SAP. It could be a type of database, or it could be a Linux server or a Windows server. Those are all target systems. We also have source systems. Sources are your system of record, your HR system, things like Workday. If you're using SAP, SuccessFactors, it's a whole bunch of them out there. OpenIAM talks to these various systems using connectors. It's basically a service that implements a common interface that can receive messages and send messages back to the core part of OpenIAM using the RabbitMQ message bus, right? And the reason we loosely coupled it through this message bus was we wanted to have the flexibility of moving these connectors around into different networks. So this way, the IAM could be sitting in one place, your target system could be in a different network, and you want to be able to have ways of connecting to them and not have to create direct connections to all of these different systems that you may have to integrate with. Most common use case around this is you have an IAM system that's running in the cloud, you have systems on-prem, and you want to be able to, talk, right? And that's a common architecture for us. And the way we do that is we have, OpenIAM running in a cloud environment. We have a connector VM running on-prem where your AD and other connectors installed, and you have a site-to-site VPN that allows data to flow, right? But it gives us the flexibility of moving things around. So the the complement to a connector is what we call a managed system. And it was a word that was created or a phrase many, many years ago, and it just stuck like a lot of other terms that are used in the product. But basically, a managed system is an endpoint that is being managed. So um, if you have multiple Active Directories or multiple databases, then you can have a managed system configuration for each one of them, and you can have one connector that is talking to each one of them. So it's a one-to-many relationship between how many endpoints one connector can actually support. Um, these managed system configurations, they include the details of how to connect to that target system. They also have details about what we call a policy map, an attribute level mapping of all the fields that OpenApp is going to control in that system and how it will generate those values. There are reconciliation rules. Reconciliation is used to keep OpenIAM in sync with with that target system. So, for example, if somebody goes into AD and makes a change, then reconciliation could be used to detect those changes and then take some action. And that action could be, we allow the change, we reject the change, we report on it. Could be a variety of things. And simulation mode is this thing that we added within probably the last year or two. It's a way to, uh, sometimes customers have systems which don't have a non-production environment. And simulation mode allows us to kind of validate that something is working before we actually talk to that end system, right? There's a couple of things that which I forgot to mention. When it comes to connectors, there are two types of connectors. We have a local and a remote. A local connector, and let me back up a little bit. All of the connectors that we have today are really written in two different technologies. They're either written in Java or they're written in .NET. Um, all of the Microsoft integrations, AD, Azure, Microsoft SQL Server, the local connectors for Windows Server, those are all a combination of .NET and PowerShell. All of the other connectors are basically Java connectors. And so those Java connectors can be running on the same box that OpenIAM is installed on. And hence we call them local, right? They don't actually have to be local. They can be moved around just like anything else. Um, but the um, uh, the remote connectors, like your AD connectors, they have to be on a Windows machine or a Windows server. So therefore they're remote, right? If you have questions, just post them. Just you don't need to raise your hand. Just post them and I'll answer them. Okay. So this kind of diagram just kind of gives you a quick overview in terms of how the pieces fit together, right? So we're looking at two sides of the picture. One is you have a source system where data is being pulled from, and another side, you have a target system where data is being written to, right? And you have a bunch of services in OpenIAM which are kind of pulling this information, they're processing it, and then it's being sent again. What you'll notice is that in the part that we care about for today's conversation is that it's the integration connectors on both sides that allow us to talk to these things. Okay? And more specifically, as we talk about the AD connector, you'll see that the AD connector talks just like all the other connectors through RabbitMQ. But there's a port which is 5672, which you would use for all communication flows on. You can change that port if you want. Um, Also, if you're going to enable TLS on RabbitMQ, which in production settings you probably should, then there's a separate port for that as well. Okay. So these are things that we're going to go through in the actual install. So this is the again, going kind of separating out the Microsoft connectors from the Java connectors. The Java connectors all come as a jar file. There's a command line utility that you can use to start and stop those. The Microsoft connectors all have an installer, which will basically walk you through. When you install, it really is extremely simple, but all they really want to know is where does RabbitMQ live, right? The host and IP address for where your RabbitMQ host is going to talk to. It wants to know what the username and password is. And this is the username and password to connect to RabbitMQ. This is not an identity in OpenIAM. So just keep that distinction in mind as you're kind of working through this. And the last one is the queue that is going to be used. You'll see that it defaults to remote connector, _1. Um, there has to be a matching connector definition on the OpenApp side to um, to make that link, right? Because if the queues don't align, the data is not going to flow. Right? Okay, so this again, we're gonna let's just jump into the actual configuration. These slides are there more for reference. We'll be publishing this, so but I think that since we're going to go through it, there's no point for me to talk, um, about great detail about every single parameter that we can configure. Let's just jump right into it and go from there. So there's a question here. Can we create custom connectors? For example, a soap for a soap service. So 100% yes, you can create your own custom connectors, and there's really three ways that you can do this. One is you can write your own custom connector using Java, or you can do so using .NET. As long as you can receive the message off of RabbitMQ, you can pretty much write in anything you want to, right? If you don't want to do that much work, there are two script connectors. There's a Groovy script connector and a PowerShell script connector. And basically what we did was we created basically a shell where we did all the background work for you to talk to that RabbitMQ and send messages back and forth. And all you need to do is write the implementation and how you're going to take data that came in and how are you going to call that SOAP service or really anything you want to and go from there, right? Um, there are other generic connectors there, like for example, there's one for Skim. So if your system supports Skim, then it's just a configuration exercise, but that's not really a custom connector, right? Okay, so I've already connected over to our Windows server. Now, for simplicity, this um, we're we're using the same test server where we have our AD controller and we're installing our connector there. When you're doing this, don't do it this way. You should keep your domain controller pristine and just have a small connector VM where you can install this, right? So I've already downloaded the AD connector onto this box. You can, so with every release that we do, we publish URLs for all the connectors and the RPM distribution. It's also on the OpenIAM website. You can just download this from there. And so once we get going here, the installer is gonna kick in. It's gonna say, what do you want to do? I say I'm gonna install, and I'm gonna say yes, go ahead. And it's gonna ask you where. I'm gonna give it a different path. Let's just call this 2 for argument's sake. Okay. Yes. So the question is, so I must install the AD connector on another Windows VM that is domain joined with admin privileges. That is correct. Yes. Again, it's just a recommendation. You shouldn't do these things on your domain controller. Just keep that as clean as possible, right? Okay, so here, our Rabbit host, the RabbitMQ host. Let me grab that. So this is the host. The username is on RabbitMQ is OpenIAM. And the password is going to be, okay, all this other stuff looks correct. Now let's just do a test connection. And it was successful. So let's go to next, and it should finish at this point. And once this is up and running, you'll see this if you go to control panel and you look at the Windows services, you'll be able to see it, over there as well. So the question is, does the tool have connectors to connect to web services, or does it allow generating such connectors? So if you're talking about web services which are supporting SCIM, then yes, you can easily configure that. If you are talking about connectors which are exposing a REST API or a SOAP API, then you can use the script connector to be able to create that. It doesn't, at this point, generate the connectors by scratch. It is something that's on the roadmap, and the ideal view on this is to be able to integrate an LLM with that so that it can automate most of the connector generation, right? Another question is, how do I configure the connector to connect to AD via a secure port? I mean, the connection between AD and the connector. Now, so when we so when I answer that question, I'm going to go to the one after it. So we just installed everything into this AD connector 2 folder. There is a config file here called connector.config. And if we open this up, we'll see um, the various details around this. It's also going to tell you where it's doing the logging. So there's a SQLite database, which is what it's capturing everything into. You can use a link pad to be able to connect to it. Somewhere in here, so there's a RabbitMQ port, and there's another. If you're using AD, you want to use a secure port, you can enable TLS, and this is one of the installation options, so that you can establish a secure communication with your AD. Okay. Another question is, are there message payloads to RabbitMQ encrypted by default, or does TLS need to be enabled to provide CIA guarantees? So in that environment, we should enable TLS on RabbitMQ. So this will cause all communication in and out of RabbitMQ to be able to go over TLS. Inside RabbitMQ, they are encrypted. So the issue really is making sure that the data flowing in and out of RabbitMQ is secure, right? Okay, so we have our connector up. There again, everything that's in here is within this file. So at this point, let's go ahead and also what we're going to do is I just want to use, I've got a PowerShell set up here. We're going to just check a couple of group memberships just to make sure that I have them correct, because we're going to use them to be able to test. So, right, that one works. And just want to do the same thing for a group membership. Okay, let's move on to the next step. Okay, so this was, we're back to our test instance that we set up last time, right? And I'm logging into the admin interface. So first thing is we want to make sure that our connector is registered, right? So we go to connectors, and you'll see that we already have an entry. So there's most of the connectors that we have, you'll find like a default entry for them already. And you'll see that the connector is, so this queue matches the queue name that's in that config file on that AD connector. So that part's really important. Then there is a new thing that was added here called enable priority queue. If you are going to be using OpenIAM for AD authentication, or you're going to be using OpenIAM to do a lot of self-service password type changes. Um, what was happening before was that all of the AD connectors, all of the AD messages, and this was really for any connector, they were all basically said that they were flowing through the same queue. So if you did a large sync and your queue was backed up and then you were trying to use AD authentication, well, now your AD authentication just got stalled. Same thing with password resets, which needed to happen immediately. So basically this priority queue has basically created a parallel queue where those requests can flow while your sync tasks are being happening. Currently, all the PowerShell connectors have this. In the next version 4.2.2, all of the connectors will support this capability. Okay. There's a question here that says, you said you need to have an entry for each connector we connect to prior to the installation of the connector. It doesn't need to be prior. You can create your connector, configuration here in OpenIAM first. That's not the order in which is not really that important. The most important thing is that we have um, that these queues align, right? And if you do see the connector afterwards, I would just come back in here and I would just hit a save, just to make sure that queue is connected. The other thing that you want to keep in mind when you're doing this is the connector configuration. These are a whole bunch of like default parameters that you may need to configure your connector. And again, you'll look at some of these things. Some of them are related to databases. Some of them are related to directories. So in this case, since we're going to be syncing both users and groups, I turned on uh, these settings for the base DN and parameters for users, and then the base DN and parameters for for the group memberships as well, so that I can configure these. So because these parameters will show up on that manage configuration screen, right? Okay, so we have our connector installed. It's there. Let's go to our manage system and we will configure a new manage system, right? So now, if you're doing this for the first time, don't do it the way that I'm doing it, which is I'm starting from scratch, and largely because I'm trying to make a point. Use one of the existing configurations, just rename it. It will save you, a little bit of grief in the beginning of not having to tinker around with every parameter, right? So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick which connector is it that I want to use. So in this case, it's the AD PowerShell connector. And I'm going to say, right, I'm going to mark it as active. And then I'm going to put in, this one, it throws everyone off. It's, this is the host, not of your AD, but of where your connector is installed. So if you're, because this is basically telling OpenIAM, where do I find this connector, right? And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in, um, my service account details, right? So this is really just my account. And so at this point, this looks okay. We can save it. Um, so the question is, can we have multiple hosts for the connectors? I think I know what you're getting at. You're talking about basically you've got high availability, you've got multiple domain hosts that you can connect to. You can, I don't remember exactly how we can do it. Let me find out the answer for that, and I'll follow up with that in the next session that we have. So the question is, what is the login ID and password that was used here? This is your AD service account. It's misleading because I'm using it to put my name on it, but this is a service account that you would create for OpenIAM to connect to your AD, and you're going to give it a limited set of permissions so that it can perform the read-write operations that it needs to, right? So if we go back to our managed system dashboard, we should see that it's already connected. Um, and I'm wondering, I have made a mistake here. Um, that should actually be the host. All right. Um, and so once I do that, now I can go ahead and start filling out these rest of these details, right? So for example, the primary key that I'm going to use is going to be the same account name. Okay. Um, if you use, okay, the question is, if I use a custom name for a queue, how will I be sure that the RabbitMQ um, will will have this queue? Um, when you create that queue name, it should it should create that queue for you for these connectors to be able to have that traffic flow through it. But I'll confirm for you on that question as well. This question says, I'm confused about the host URL. Should it be the connector IP or the AD itself? No, the host URL here is the uh, is is the IP address of your connector VM, right? So this is where your connector is installed. And the fact that we're using the connector VM and the AD domain controller itself the same place is by causing a little bit of confusion. Um, which IP will be filled in for the host URL? This is what I was just saying right now. This it's your it's the IP address of the host name of your Windows connector VM. Okay. All right. So we got the base DN for users. We're going to use actually going to use the same base DN for everything because we're going to be syncing in groups from the same place. Um, and I should really stop cutting and pasting things because I'm putting all of this stuff in the wrong place. So here we have a search filter that we can put in, um, and it could be something like this, right? It can be a general filter. So these filters are PowerShell commands that you can run, right? And I think we could do the same thing. Let's leave this blank and see what happens. So the question is, can these be standard LDAP filters? Okay, so that's a good question. So we're here using the PowerShell connector. So if you're using the PowerShell connector, you need to use basically commands that are valid PowerShell commands. There is an LDAP connector which supports standard LDAP. With that, by all means, you can use standard LDAP, parameters, right? The question is, can we define multiple base DNs for user groups and different OUs? Yes, you can. And again, as long as that filter is a valid PowerShell command, you can support that here. Some of these questions which are being asked, what we'll do is we'll, when we post up the video later on today, we'll take these questions and we'll kind of add them as a separate document into the community post so that the answers to these are there as well, right? Because these are perfectly good questions and I appreciate you guys raising them. Okay, so we we've got this part hooked up. So let's at this point go ahead and see if we can sync we can sync a couple of groups, right? So if I go to synchronization And there's already an example here, a predefined example for AD PowerShell group example, right? So this is installed out of the box. So the question, does the connector have to be an AD PowerShell module, or can we use any PowerShell.NET commandlet? If you want to use if you want to use your own, I think that what you can use is you can use the script connector that's there for PowerShell, and you can introduce your own, custom logic or approach if you want to. Yeah. Okay, so first things here is we need to change the managed system. So this is the one that I created, the AD webinar host. The objects we're going to have is a group. And let's see if we're going to bring over a group, right? So let's just take a group that we have a command for. And the rest of it should be okay. And just to kind of review what we're doing here, right? So we pick the 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 managed system, right, which is relevant for this, and right, and then we pick the kind of object. So in this case, it's going to be groups, and then we have it's the type of sync. Is it a complete or an incremental sync? If you're now just one, this the synchronization capability in OpenIAM, it's used for a number of things. So one is to import data like we're doing it right here, right? We're bringing in, groups, and then we're going to bring in users. Um, but you can have this running on a schedule which is what the cron expression is, and it will run regularly. Or if you're hooking this up to your HR system, it's going to drive automated user lifecycle management as well, right? And so once we have these, let's go ahead and do a sync now, and it should run. Let's just open up another tab where we can see whether I screwed something up again or not. And so if I go to administration and I go to log viewer, I should see that the sync was saved, and in a couple seconds, um, well, I got it right. So it created a search and it created a thread, right? So if I open this up, it's going to tell me it found one record, and what did it do, right? And then the next part over here, it's going to tell me that it imported a group, and we can see the details, around this, right? So every step of the way, what the connector found is being captured here. Okay, so if we go to our group screen, this is the group that we just brought over, right? We can see that it was the host it's from, the base DN, I'm sorry, the DN of the group is going to be here as well, right? And we're controlling all of this. All of this is happening in that transformation script. I'm purposely not going into it this time because we're going to get a lot deeper into it and then the follow-on sessions, right? But so now that we've done that, let's go ahead and see if we can sync a user. And at this point, we're going to go to synchronization. We're going to use the next example that we have. And again, it's the same thing. I need to change my managed system. This time I'm syncing a user, not a group. I'm going to do a complete sync because I'm only going to pull over one user anyway. And so let's change the identity of this user. So one thing that this SQL directory filter here, it's um, it's overriding that filter that was there in the managed system, right? So we're doing most of the work here. What you cannot override here are the base DN parameters. Those base DN parameters for both, searching for users and for group, they're basically telling the connector, this is your world. You cannot work outside of this, right? So any command that you, enter over here must fit into that world. Okay, so we've saved this. Let's do a sync now. And then again, we should see this stuff coming through. Okay, and let's just go to, the log viewer. And again, we have success and we have the thread bringing that user over, right? And so on and so forth, right? And so if I were to, you know, um, just do a search here for Drake Marcus, you can see that the user was created in a classic view, and I'll see the basic attributes that, um, that we brought over, right? So the question is, from what I've gathered, connect AD with OpenIAM using a console, and then we can configure AD through OpenIAM. Am I right? Yep, pretty much. You're gonna do a little bit of background work to get AD hooked up, and then the rest of the configurations is done through the OpenIAM UI. Yes. Okay. And um, and if we go to user history, we'll see that the record was imported, right? So this is basically a trimmed down view. But these are the basic steps. Now we could have changed those filters to be much more open-ended, right? So we could have imported in all of our groups, not the one group that I picked. And the reason I did that was because I was testing earlier and I didn't want to spend another half an hour cleaning up my database and then running it over here again, right? Um, so that's it for today. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Yep. Um, the question is this an application user, i.e. AD user, or is this an identity? So when we bring over, okay, it's a good question. When we bring over a user from AD, we're going to create a user in OpenIAM. We're going to capture the attributes from AD that we want to bring over and add to the OpenIAM user profile. If we think it's going to be authoritative for it, and then we're going to create an identity here over here. Well, I think in this case we haven't added that AD identity to it, but normally we would add an extra identity, another row here that says it's an AD identity to kind of capture that. The objective is that you would have potentially one user profile and many identities that go from different managed systems, right? So is it in the agenda to demonstrate an HR source connector setting up? So we don't have an HR system to connect to in for this webinar. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a CSV file to to be able um, to kind of drive the whole user lifecycle management part, right? But the way that you would connect it with your HR system would be exactly the same, minus the differences in the setting up, right? The question is, will we show a connector for Entra ID? We weren't planning on it, but if there's interest in that, what we can do is we can have a separate video created that would show basically the same steps that we followed just now, with Entra ID. And I think there might be some differences because we have the graph connector on Entra ID, and the service accounts may be a little bit different. So we can create that separately and get that published. Okay, well, I think that we got two people asking for it, so I will ask one of our engineers who works on that side to pull that together. So the question is, what happens if um, we have user data in two different systems? Would users sync from both systems into one ID in OpenIAM? Yes. So this is exactly the point. So you will have two, three, it could be 100 different systems. And so what you would have is you would have one user profile, right? Like, so you'd have one user record over here like this, right? And then down here for user identity, you would have, something like this, right? Let me just create, a bogus one, right? What's this guy's name? that we use, right? And it could be different, right? It could be demarcus, something like that, right? It doesn't even have to be the same. And so what you would have is you would have this whole collection of identities that you would see that these are the identities that I have. And then if you go to entitlement viewer, you would see all the group memberships that that are there, right? So that's kind of what you would end up, and that's what you want. You want to be able to know all the accounts that a person has, the state that they're in, the level of access that they have, because you need that to be able to do your access certifications later on. Any other questions? Yeah. So the question was, it's going back. What exactly shall be in this guy over here, the SQL query or the directory filter, right? Let's just go to user, right? So it's this parameter. What should be here? So the purpose of this is, so this is in the context of synchronization, and we're basically telling OpenIAM through the connector to say which records do I want to synchronize, right? So this filter or this query should result in that outcome, right? Now, the way you express this query is going to be different. If you're using AD PowerShell, you're going to have a PowerShell command here that says, right? So if we had said something like this, for example, right? If we did this, this would say, go give me all users within the base DM that I have. Okay. Now, if this was an LDAP connector, right? You could have said something like this, right? Again, I'm gonna get this wrong, right? And it could be, something like this, right? Like inet org person, right? It could be something like that, right? And if this was SQL, it could be, something else, right? So it's yeah. So the question was, can I use a query that will show something beyond that? Here, you can you can do this. This will give me all, right? This will give you all the users within the base DN that you define. And again, I appreciate these questions. We're going to use this um, to build out a more comprehensive doc that kind of covers these questions, right? Yes, we will be publishing this video later on today. So the question is there a correlation configuration for each application account? Yes, it's actually part of your managed systems. And if you look at this here, there is a reconciliation. This will help you to correlate the accounts in the different applications into one, and we will cover that as we get into the automated user lifecycle management in the upcoming sessions. Okay, I think it sounds like that's about it. Again, thank you everybody for your time. I appreciate all the questions and the time that you guys are making for this. And we'll post this up later today. It will also be in the community portal. And if there are additional questions, please fire away. We're happy to help. Okay. Thanks again, everybody, for your time.